Hello, everyone. And first of all, thank you, Enrique, for organising this amazing event. I'm really delighted to be a part of it. And for my topic today, I chose well-formed outcomes, the key to transforming your life. Now, lots of people say to me, I did that, on an introductory course. If you're an experienced NLPer, you're probably thinking, yeah, I know all about well-formed outcomes. And maybe you do. But I'm going to give you my take on it. And if you're fairly new to NLP, I would really encourage you to give this piece of NLP your best attention, because I think you can transform your whole life if you master this pattern. I know that's a bold claim, but I really do believe that this is the key for a lot of people to getting what they want out of life and getting past some of the things that might currently be holding you back. So the well-formed outcomes pattern, there are several versions of it knocking around. The version that I prefer has 6 criteria to it, and we'll go through those 6 criteria. But let's talk about the name first, well-formed outcomes. What does that mean? It means that the way that the outcome is formed in your head, so the way that you represent it to yourself, the way you think about your outcome, is well formed. Right? So a well-formed outcome is one that, by the very nature of the way that you think about it, it makes it easy for you to achieve it. Now, lots of people have really bad habits about the way they think about what they want. And that term outcome, it's a nice flexible one because you can use it to mean what do you want to achieve in a phone call you're about to make, or you could use it for your big long-term life plan. It's a desired end result. It can be huge, it can be tiny, it can be somewhere in the middle, it can be really significant, it can be, moderately significant, not all that important, but still, necessary. So an outcome is any desired end result. And a lot of people, when they think about what they want, they never really get into properly thinking about it because they kind of talk themselves out of it before they get there. So you might get something like somebody says, oh, I really would like to go for promotion to the next level in my career. And then they think, oh, but I probably haven't got the skills, I haven't got the experience, I don't have time to study for the exams. Whatever it is, they start to tell themselves there's a reason why I can't do this before they ever really get to how am I going to make it happen. So the well-formed outcomes pattern is a way of thinking about your outcomes in a constructive, creative way that makes it easier for you to actually achieve them. And as I said, there are 6 criteria for an outcome to qualify as being well-formed. So the first one is that it must be stated in the positive. So when you describe your outcome, you're talking about getting what you do want rather than getting away from what you don't want. And of course, one of the reasons for this is that you get what you focus on. And at the unconscious level, the brain doesn't really process negatives directly. I'm sure you've heard that classic illustration where I say to you, don't think about a blue tree, for example. And the first thing that pops into your head is that blue tree. It's the thing I asked you not to think about. And that's because when our brains are processing information, then we make pictures in our mind's eye, we hear sounds and so on before we get to the words. And by the time you've made the picture in your mind's eye, it's like the damage is done if you're thinking about something that you don't want. So for an outcome to qualify as being well formed, it needs to be stated in the positive. So that would be, I want a new job, not I need to leave my old job. It would be, I want to be skilled at something rather than I want to stop failing at something. So we're always focusing on the thing that we do want. And the other thing that makes this part of the well-formed outcome really good is to make sure that you've got rid of any comparatives. So some people would say, oh, my outcome is to earn more money. Well, if you earned $1 more, that's more money, but that probably isn't really what you meant. So get rid of the more and put a figure on it. Be bold and say what you actually want rather than just something's kind of, heading in a certain direction. So that's the first thing, is that your well-formed outcome will be stated in the positive. And then the second criterion is that you have a sensory specific description of it. So that means you can describe your end result in terms of things that you can see, hear, feel, taste, smell. Now, not all of those might be relevant for every outcome. There might not be a taste to it, except the taste of success. But what we're looking for is if there was a moment in time when you could say, yes, I've done it. What just happened in that moment? What did you see? What did you hear? What did you feel that let you know that you'd achieved your outcome? And be careful with the feelings, because obviously you're going to feel good when you achieve your outcome, but that comes after you know you've achieved it. So you've got to look for what's the sensory input that lets you know you have achieved it. So it could be you see an email from somebody, you read it and it tells you the answer that you wanted to hear. Or it could be, suppose it was a fitness goal and you wanted to perhaps participate in a 10K run or something like that. Well, the feeling might be quite relevant, because the feeling of being able to run 10K and not be completely exhausted, that might be an important part of your evidence that you've succeeded. So think about if there was a moment in time when you could say, yes, I've achieved my outcome. What just happened? What did you see? What did you hear? What did you feel? Was there even a taste or smell involved in it that let you know that you're there? So they're the first two criteria. It's stated in the positive, and you've got a sensory specific description. The third criterion then is for an outcome to be well formed, it has to be something that's under your control. So you've got to be at cause in this outcome. It's no good having an outcome that relies on other people to make it happen, because you could wait forever. So sometimes you might start off thinking about something and then you get to this third criterion and you think, actually, that's not really under my control. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have your outcome. What it means is you might need to refocus your attention so that you're focused on something that is under your control. So, small example, I was talking to a client one day and she said, I really wish my teenager would tidy his bedroom. Now, anybody who's got teenage children, you're probably going to be thinking, good luck with that. It's something that, most parents have an issue with at some point. And so I said to her, okay, so, let's make it into a well-formed outcome. What is it you want? I want my teenager to have a tidy bedroom. Great. How will you know you've got that? And she could describe to me how it would look, carpets visible, the desktop's visible, the bed's made, Great. Is it under your control? She said, well, only if I do it myself. Well, that's not really the point, is it? So at that point, the conversation goes in a different direction. So I said to her, okay, so what's relevant here that is under your control that you want? And she thought about it for a while because it didn't just immediately spring to mind. And sometimes the process of making an outcome well formed does take a bit of thought. And eventually where she got to was she said, I want to find a way to influence my teenager to tidy his bedroom. Okay, that's a valid outcome. And and then you go back to the beginning. So how will you know you've achieved that? Well, bedroom will be tidy. So actually the end result's the same. The bedroom's still tidy, but her focus now is on the things that she can do. So, because your opinion about what's under your control might be different from somebody else's. And one of the things I can tell you from my experience is that the more I did this, the more things felt like they were under my control, that I could actually make things happen that would end up with the result that I wanted. Sometimes, though, you might say, well, this is definitely not under my control. Suppose you've decided you want to go for a new job. It's unlikely that you are the person who actually gets to decide who's appointed into the role. And so then you've got to be a little bit smart about being specific enough that you get the job that you want, but not being so specific that there's only one example of it. Because then if you're not successful in getting that role, then you've got nowhere to go. So sometimes you have to be persistent. Sometimes you have to say, okay, I'm going to go after a job like this. And if I don't get the first one, I'll apply for another one, because it's not under my control to actually award myself the job. But it is under my control to do everything I can to present myself well at the interview and give myself the best chance of getting the job. And if I don't get the first one, then I'll get another one, and I'll keep applying. So sometimes a bit of persistence is needed. And this kind of brings me into the fourth criterion. So we've got, it's stated in the positive, you have a sensory description of the outcome and the evidence that you've achieved it. You know it's under your control. And the fourth thing then is about context. So where, when, how, with whom do you want this? And that's, if you like, that's about putting some boundaries around it. So, when do you want it? When do you not want it? Who do you want it with? Who do you not want it with? A client of mine once came to a coaching session and she said, I think that what I really want is to behave in a more assertive way. Okay. Often a really good thing to aim for. And we talked about it, and she got really clear about what she meant by assertive, what that looks like, sounds like, and so on. She's very clear that it was under her control. And when we started talking about context, the thing that she realized was that, in fact, there were just two colleagues that she had for whom something in the relationship she had with them, she got into a habit of not really saying what she thought, of not really challenging them, not really putting forward her point of view. And so she was able then to narrow it down and say that the more assertive behavior that she had in mind applied particularly to these two professional relationships. So that's being clear about what, where and when do I want this? And sometimes there might be a time frame on it. So, if it was a fitness goal and if you wanted to participate in an event, then there might be a specific day upon which that event is happening. And so the fitness goal has to come to fruition before that date. So that would give you a constraint to it. So that's the fourth thing. So those four top criteria, it's stated in the positive, you have a sensory specific description of your outcome, you know that it's under your control, and you have defined the context. Those four things, I guess they have some commonality with something like the old SMART goals model, because it's about clarity. It's about being really absolutely clear about what are we talking about? What do I really want? Now, the other two criteria are the ones that I think make the well-formed outcomes pattern superior to any other model that I've looked at to do with goal setting. And that's because they address the things that are going on outside of conscious awareness, and they address the things in the bigger picture. So the fifth criterion has to do with secondary gain. And the idea of secondary gain is it's the positive byproducts of not achieving what we say we want to achieve. Now, that might sound, how can there possibly be any benefits? But of course, if you've said there's something that I want and you're not achieving it, you're not getting there, you haven't even made a start sometimes, then if you ask yourself, why is that? Often what comes to mind is people kind of come up with excuses. Oh, well, I've been busy, or I'm lazy, or I don't really know where to start, or maybe it wasn't that important after all. And we kind of, dismiss it in a way. But think of it this way. If there is a gap between where you are today and where you think you want to be, and you're not doing anything to close that gap, then is there something in the present situation of where you are now that you feel like you'd lose if you were to move to the desired, is it really desired, situation? And often, if you think about it, you can find that there is something that you've got invested in the way things are now that's holding you back from investing the time and energy to get that desired end result, to get your outcome. Let me give you some examples of this. So there was a lady I was working with, and she said she wanted to do her professional qualifications. She'd recently moved from doing an admin job in an operations team into the HR department, and she'd been doing really well and she'd enjoyed it. And the head of the HR department had said to her, we would really like to have you on the team permanently. How would you feel about doing your HR qualifications and working your way up to being an HR officer, and then, gradually further up the chain. And she really liked this idea. And the months had gone by and she hadn't enrolled in a course. She hadn't done anything about it, but she still liked the idea and she still thought she would like to do her qualifications. So having got clear about that, done the first 4 criteria, I said to her, okay, so what's holding you back here? Given that you know what you want, you know what it's going to be like when you've achieved it, you know it's under your control, you've got a clear time frame on it, how come you haven't done anything about it? Is there something that you feel you're going to have to sacrifice in order to achieve this? Something that's so important you don't want to give it up? And she thought for a moment and she said, well, I don't want to give up my social life. Which is fair enough, isn't it? So I said to her, okay, so the course that you've been looking at, how big a time commitment is it? How are you going to have to give up all of your social life? And what she said next really fascinated me, because she said, I don't know, because I haven't actually got that far. I've just assumed that I'll have to study every evening and every weekend. But she said, now I'm talking about it, maybe it's not as bad as that. Maybe I'm being a bit unrealistic. So okay, well, maybe a good thing to do then would be to go and do some homework. And I saw her again a little while later, and she said, she'd gone and done the research and she'd discovered how many hours a week was involved. And she worked out that she'd have an evening going to college. She'd probably have to spend another evening during the week doing some studying, and then probably half a day at the weekend. And that would probably be enough for her to keep on top of it. So I said to her, so can you get your professional qualifications and maintain a social life? And she said, oh yeah, of course I can. Yeah. So, you might think that's obvious, but sometimes these things are going on in the back of your mind. And what's happening outside of conscious awareness isn't always logical, because logic is an invention of the conscious mind. And what happens outside of conscious awareness often isn't logical, doesn't make sense. And it's only when you sort of get the pieces of the jigsaw out of your head and out on the table where you can see them that the picture becomes clear. Let me give you another example. Sometimes you have to dig a little bit deeper for these things. This is another HR person. I do work quite a lot with HR people, but I work mostly with people and technology. This lady came on one of my public NLP courses, and we were doing the well-formed outcomes pattern, and I asked for a volunteer, so that we could do a little demonstration of how it works as a conversation. And this particular lady said that she wanted to lose a bit of weight. Now, it's not uncommon. Lots of people feel like they could do with shedding a few pounds, a few kilos. And I said, okay, so, how much? And she said, it's not very much, really. She said, I changed jobs and I've put on about 4 pounds. So she said, it's just enough that most of my work clothes feel a little bit tight and a little bit uncomfortable. She said, I really don't want to have to go out and buy a whole load more work clothes. I'd much rather get myself back to normal size. Fair enough. So we talked a bit, and I asked her, how come she'd put the weight on? I said, you mentioned changing jobs. Has what's changed with that? And she said, well, nothing really. She said, just, I've got into this bad habit that every afternoon when I have a cup of tea, I also have a bar of chocolate. And she said, that's really the only thing that I've changed. And so I think that's probably why I've put the weight on. So I said, okay, well, that seems reasonable. So it also seems really simple that if you want to shed that extra weight, just give up the bar of chocolate. And she said, and this is really interesting, she said, I tried that, but I wasn't doing the job as well. So I went back to it. So, okay. Talk to me about that then. So how does that work? How can having a bar of chocolate in the middle of the afternoon get you to do your job more effectively? And it wasn't just the sugar rush. So what she said was that she'd moved to a slightly bigger company, and she was an HR manager, and her role was very much about providing support and advice to operational departments. And she said, in an average day, she said, I probably know about a third of what I'm going to do at the start of the day, and the rest of it happens during the day, because she said, I'm kind of on call, if you like. If people want information, they want help, And so there'll be several things that come in the morning, and a couple of things come in the afternoon. And sometimes they're quite big things, sometimes they're small. But she said there's always somebody asking for some help for something, and that's what I'm there to do. So I said, okay, so where does the chocolate come in? And she said, if I stop in the middle of the afternoon and have a cup of tea and a bar of chocolate, then that gives me a bit of time. Because she said, if I'm eating a bar of chocolate, then I'm not going to be sort of, doing email. I'm not going to be on the phone. And so she said, I tend then to look at my plan for the day, and I think about, what do I need to get done before I finish for the day? I maybe got, an hour and a half, 2 hours before I go home. So what are the priorities? And she said, what I noticed was that when I didn't have the bar of chocolate, I would go back to my desk with a cup of tea, and I would just drink my tea while I was doing email and on the phone. And she said sometimes I'd get to the end of the day and there'd be something I'd missed, and then I'd be thinking, oh, either I'm going to let somebody down, or I'm going to have to stay late, and then I'm letting my family down. And she said it was really, really uncomfortable. So she said that's really why, I went back to having the bar of chocolate, because it just kind of, makes me stop for a few minutes. Interesting, hey? So of course the question then is, can you have it all? Now, you might think that the thing that she doesn't want to give up is the bar of chocolate. But actually, if you get beyond the surface, the thing that she doesn't want to give up is that little bit of time when she's not doing email, she's not on the phone, but she's actually thinking about, what do I need to get done for the rest of the day? So the question then becomes, how do you buy yourself that little bit of time without eating a bar of chocolate? And somebody else in the group said, oh, I know, eat an orange, because that's messy, so you won't want to get your fingers on the keyboard if you've got orange juice on them, but it won't make you fat. And that's it's a good solution. But of course, the best solution is always the one that a person comes up with for themselves. So the lady in question, she took a little bit of time and she thought about it, and eventually she said to me, I know what I'm going to do. She said, I'm going to go and buy myself a big tub of really thick, expensive hand cream. And in the afternoon, when I have my cup of tea, she said, I'm going to go to the washroom and I'm going to wash my hands. And then I'm going to come back to my desk and take off my rings and get a nice handful of cream. And then I'm going to sit at my desk and rub the cream into my hands while I look at my list and decide, what do I need to do before I go home today? And some people in the group were looking at her as if she'd just landed from another planet. But that doesn't matter, because it's her solution to her outcome. And so that's what she did. And coincidentally, a few months later, I'd gone to do some work in the company where she worked, and I hadn't expected to see her, but we just passed in the corridor. I went, oh, hello, how are you? We chatted for a minute, and she said, I have to show you. And she kind of twizzled her skirt around to show me that it fitted quite loosely now. She said, I'm back to my normal size. And I said, oh, that's brilliant, well done. And she said, yeah, but look at my hands. So she got an extra benefit on top. So sometimes you have to look a little bit kind of, beyond the surface to understand, what is it that you've got invested in not achieving your outcome. So that's the fifth criterion for a well-formed outcome. That is the question of secondary gain. So are there some kind of positive byproducts of not achieving your outcome? And is there some way that you can take those with you, some way that you can have them as well as having your outcome? So that's 5. The 6th criterion then is about ecology. And you probably know, in the NLP sense, when we talk about ecology, we're talking about consequences. If I do this, is it going to be good for me in all parts of my life? If I do this, am I going to be happy with the knock-on effects to other situations, other people, other outcomes? Does it really work for me on all levels? And there are lots of different ways that you can look at this. I mean, the first thing is a matter of congruence. Is, do I really want this? And if you can say with a straight face, yes, I really want this, and it feels congruent, it feels like you're wholehearted about it, then that's a good start. And of course, if you're using this in a coaching scenario, you can often see non-verbally, is somebody really committed, or is there something that's holding them back? So that's one place to ask, is this really ecological for you? Then there's also, you can be more specific. So how much time is it going to take? And is it worth that time to you? Are you happy to spend those hours? Like the lady with the professional qualifications, are you willing to spend those 10, 12 hours a week in order to get what you want? Because inevitably, if you spend the time doing those things, that's time that is not available to you to do other things, which is, if you like, opportunity cost. And so cost is the second thing that you might look at. You look at time, look at cost. So it could be opportunity cost, it could be financial cost, it could be cost in some other way. Is it worth it to you? What you have to invest of yourself, your time, your energy. Sometimes it's like, yeah, I could do that, but I'd be exhausted at the end of it. Is it worth the cost in terms of your life energy to do it? So that's also important to consider. And then the one that I usually save till the end, that if I'm doing this as a coaching conversation, I would very rarely ask this question unless everything else was in place. And that's, is it in keeping with your sense of self? So in other words, are you the sort of person that does this, that gets this in your life? And sense of self is quite a hard thing to put into words. It's more of a feeling, sense of self. But if somebody asks you to do something that doesn't really fit with who you think you are, it feels uncomfortable. And it's the same thing with an outcome. If something doesn't really fit with who you think you are, then you're probably not going to put the energy into it. So it's really important that you do this check that, is this really kind of congruent with me as a person? I have a great example of this. I was running a training program about performance management, and we were talking about how to give feedback to someone who isn't doing a very good job. And we'd been talking about different ways of approaching this. And then a chap sort of at the back of the room stuck his hand up and he said to me, I understand what you're talking about here. He said, but, he said, I'm a nice person, so I wouldn't ever criticize my staff and tell them they were doing something wrong. It's interesting, isn't it? I'm a nice person, so I wouldn't criticize my staff. Now, there's part of me, the corporate manager in me sort of wants to say to him, that's your job, right? Like, grow up, do it. This is your job. This is what you're being paid to do, is to get good performance out of other people. But of course, I know that that's not going to make any difference whatsoever to him if I just say, well, tough, you've got to do it. Because it doesn't fit with who he thinks. He says, I'm a nice person, and doing this feels like it's not a nice thing to do. So I wasn't really prepared to leave it at that. As a trainer, I like to help people succeed. And he'd come on the course and he wanted to learn how to manage performance. So it seemed like it was a good opportunity to dig a little bit deeper into this. So I started my career in high street fashion retail. Not an obvious thing to do with a degree in psychology, but it was a lot of fun. And I learned a huge amount about managing people in that environment. And so, as NLP trainers often do, I decided I'd tell him a little story, partly in the guise of some questioning. And so what I talked about was, if you go for a management job in that kind of organization, this will be the same in any service organization where you're dealing with customers face to face. One of the questions I got asked at interview on more than one occasion was, imagine you've got somebody in your team who has what we euphemistically call a personal hygiene problem, and what would you do about it? And of course, the wrong answer is you say, oh, I'll get the whole team together and we'll give them a little pep talk and, remind them how important personal hygiene is. And, that's what I do. That's the wrong answer, because if you do that, everybody assumes that actually you're talking to somebody else. And so the right answer is that you have to have that conversation one-on-one with the person who needs to make some changes. And I can tell you from experience, it is toe-curlingly embarrassing to have to do it. But the good thing is, it probably takes less than a minute to have that conversation, because neither of you wants to prolong it. You're going to get out of it as soon as possible. But you do actually have to get one-on-one with the person and say, I'm really sorry to tell you, you've got a bit of a problem. you need to shower more frequently, or you need to wash your clothes more frequently, or whatever it is, and we need you coming to work smelling nice for the customers. So I talked about this to the man who was too nice to tell somebody in his team that they had got something wrong. And I said to him, have you ever worked somewhere, having set the scene with that little story, I said, have you ever worked somewhere where you had a colleague who did have a bit of a personal hygiene issue? And he said, oh, yeah. I said, okay, so, what happened? And he said, well, it's a chap that I worked with. He said, and we figured that, it wasn't that he didn't shower, it was that, well, he said his clothes smelt as if he left them in the washing machine too long after they'd been washed, And I said, oh, okay, so did anybody kind of point it out to him? And he said, oh, no. I said, so what happened? He said, well, people would sort of, make jokes about him behind his back and that sort of thing. I went, oh, okay. Right. So if I'm a nice person, would I allow a situation to continue where somebody was having jokes made about them behind their back? Or would I tell them that there was a problem so that they could do something about it? If I was a nice person, what would I do? And I was rewarded with the sight of the lights coming on and him going, right, yeah, I do know. And he said, yeah, it's not really criticizing, is it? He said, you're giving people an opportunity to do better. Yes. So just because your initial sense is this doesn't really fit with who I think I am, doesn't mean to say that you can't have your outcome. All it means is you need a slightly different way of thinking about it. So it's a reframe, if you like. It's coming at it from a different angle, seeing it in a different way, so that you can get a sense of, yes, I am the sort of person who will do this. And then you stand a good chance of succeeding. So those are the 6 criteria for a well-formed outcome. So stated in the positive, you have a sensory specific description of it, you know it's under your control, and you've got a clear context of where and when. You've looked at secondary gain and found a way to bring with you anything that is really good about not having your outcome. And you've also checked the ecology. And if all those 6 things are in place, you have a well-formed outcome. And it should be relatively easy for you to achieve it. In fact, you might be amazed at how the universe seems to conspire to make it happen once you've gone through that process. So why do I say you can transform your whole life with it? Well, this is what I advise people to do in my classes, is once you've understood the 6 criteria, is practice. So maybe 5, 10 a day, something like that. Practice the outcomes. So it doesn't have to be, 10 massive goals. It can be, I'm about to write an email, what's my outcome for the email? And you run through it quickly. So what do I want to achieve? How will I know when I've got it? Is this under my control? Of course it is. I'm writing the email. What's the context? Have I got anything invested in not succeeding in this? Probably not. Is it in keeping with who I think? Yes, it is. Right. So it takes you like 20 seconds to run through it. But what's happening is you're rehearsing the pattern. Now, if you do between 5 and 10 a day, every day for, let's say, a fortnight, 2 weeks, not long, is it? At some point around the 2-week mark, maybe sooner, maybe a little bit later, you'll ask yourself the question, what's my outcome? And what comes to mind will already be well formed because you've installed the program in your brain. And now you're starting to think about your outcomes in that way, which means that you're then naturally choosing outcomes that are specific, that are under your control, that you haven't got anything kind of conflicting with them. And so it becomes so much easier to achieve what you want to achieve. And this is why I say you can transform your whole life if you master this one pattern. I know it's a bold claim, but I'd love you to try it out and see how you get on with it. And, even if you did your NLP training quite a while ago and you feel like, oh, yeah, I've done well-formed outcomes, I know about this. If you haven't put in that degree of practice, if you haven't rehearsed the pattern that many times, I'd really encourage you to go back and do it again and see what kind of result you get. And as I said, my experience is that the more I practice with the outcomes pattern, the more things just seem to land in my lap. That I didn't have to put in huge amounts of effort to make things happen. Just the opportunity sprung up, or I would get something out of the blue. Or Yeah, it sounds like magic, doesn't it? And we always say that NLP is a bit like magic, but it's real. And it's definitely worth training your brain to think about what you want in these terms and to ditch any bad habits you might have in the way that you think about what you want. It's very simple. It's something that is easy to practice, and I think it will reward you in a million different ways. So thank you very much for the opportunity, Enrique, to be part of your lovely summit. If people would like to find out a bit more about what I do, would like to contact me, would like to join my mailing list, my web address is brilliantminds.co.uk. I'm based in the UK, but I do have clients all over the world, so don't let that put you off. And I'm very happy to hear from anybody. You know, there's a contact form on there. If you've got questions, then always happy to have a chat. Thank you.